Hello and welcome back to T1D Academy. I'm Harold, your host, and my son Liam and I are, as always, really glad that you're here with us today as we cover another important topic. Today we're going to talk about something that every person living with type 1 diabetes has to know and has to understand. And every caregiver also needs to be well informed on this topic. And that topic is diabetic ketoacidosis, otherwise known as DKA. This is one of those topics that can sound intimidating, and rightly so. It's a potentially life-threatening condition. But the goal of this video is to break it down in a way that's clear, practical, and helps you understand exactly what's happening and what you can do to prevent it. At its core, diabetic ketoacidosis is what happens when the body doesn't have enough insulin available. And when that happens, the body can't use or process glucose the way that it's supposed to. So instead of using glucose for energy, it starts breaking down the body's fat reserves for fuel. And when that happens, when that fat is broken down, the body produces something called ketones. Now, ketones by themselves aren't the problem in small amounts. But when ketones start building up too much in the bloodstream, the blood starts to become acidic. And at the same time, blood sugars are rising, and the body is trying to get rid of that excess glucose through urination, which leads to dehydration and a loss of electrolytes. So what you end up with is a combination of not enough insulin, rising ketones, increasing acidity in the blood, dehydration, and an electrolyte imbalance. And that's what makes diabetic ketoacidosis so dangerous. Now let's talk about what actually causes diabetic ketoacidosis, because this is really important. In most cases, it comes down to one of a few things. It could be illness or infection, where the body needs more insulin than usual and it's not getting it. It could be missed insulin doses or not getting enough insulin. And for people using insulin pumps, it can be something like a site failure, a kinked cannula, a leak, or insulin simply not being delivered the way that you expect it to be. And this is where something that we've always said in the FUD Diabetes Forum community, and our motto, our running motto for pumps, insulin pumps, is, if in doubt, change it out. If blood sugars are high and not responding the way that they should, especially on a pump, you have to consider that insulin may not be getting into the body the way that you think it should. So if in doubt, change it out. If you're not sure if the insulin pump is working correctly, change it out. Now, as far as symptoms go, diabetic ketoacidosis usually doesn't just have one symptom and usually just doesn't occur all at once. There are warning signs along the way. Early on, you might see high blood sugars. You might have increased thirst or frequent urination. You might have a dry mouth. As it progresses, you can start to see fatigue, nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, and sometimes what people describe as a fruity smell on the breath. As it becomes more severe, breathing can become deeper and more labored and rapid. There can be confusion or drowsiness at that point. You're dealing with something that absolutely requires medical attention. And I do want to be very clear here. Diabetic ketoacidosis is a medical emergency. It can require hospitalization, and in severe cases, it can be life-threatening. So understanding how to recognize it early is critical to treating it. Now, one thing that's important to understand is that diabetic ketoacidosis is not just about high blood sugar. You can have high blood sugar without being in diabetic ketoacidosis. You can have high blood glucose levels without ketones being present in the bloodstream. What makes diabetic ketoacidosis different is the combination of high glucose, elevated ketones, and the blood becoming acidic. That's why ketone testing is so important. So let's shift now into prevention. because this is where you can really stay ahead of diabetic ketoacidosis. The biggest thing is making sure insulin is always being administered and delivered correctly. Even if someone is sick, even if they're not eating, insulin is still required. In many cases, illness actually increases insulin needs, not decreases them. If blood sugars are running high, especially above around 250, or if someone is sick, that's the time to check for ketones. And if ketones are present, you don't just ignore that, you act on it. Hydration is very critical. When blood sugars are high, the body starts getting rid of that excess sugar through the urine, and it pulls water along with it. That leads to more frequent urination and fluid loss. So replacing those fluids becomes really important. And not just water, electrolytes can matter as well, especially if someone is losing fluids more rapidly. But this part is key. Hydration helps support the process, but insulin is what actually stops the ketone production. Diabetic ketoacidosis is an insulin problem first. Now, in terms of managing things early before it becomes diabetic ketoacidosis, this is where experience and awareness really come into play. For Liam, over the course of more than a decade, he's only had ketones in his body twice. And both of those occasions, we were able to get things back under control with insulin, hydration, and closely monitoring what was happening, and he never arrived at diabetic ketoacidosis. Making sure he was getting enough insulin, making sure he was hydrated, allowing his body to flush out what needed to be flushed out, all while watching things closely is what kept those situations from progressing. And I want to be very clear here. That's not about treating diabetic ketoacidosis at home. That's about monitoring and catching it early enough to prevent it from becoming diabetic ketoacidosis in the first place. And that's really the goal. Also, one thing I want to mention, when Liam was first diagnosed, he wasn't in diabetic ketoacidosis yet, but he was definitely headed in that direction. We called it just in time. And that experience alone really helped drive home how quickly things can escalate if not recognized and monitored early. Now, knowing when to go to the hospital is just as important as knowing what to do early on. If ketones are moderate to large, if blood sugars remain high and aren't coming down with insulin, if there is vomiting or fluids can't be kept down, or if symptoms like difficulty breathing, confusion, or extreme fatigue begin to appear, those are not situations to wait on. That's when you seek medical attention immediately. And I want to add something here I think is just as critical, especially for anyone who may be in pre-diagnosis period and noticing symptoms that don't make sense. If you're a parent who has a child, or you are an individual who has some of the symptoms that I've expressed in this video, you should always trust your instincts. Always. If something doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right, even if you can't fully explain what's going on in your body, pay attention to those symptoms. For us, that was a big part of Liam's diagnosis. We were told on the Friday that he was just not feeling well and to keep an eye on him, and if things change over the weekend, address it, otherwise bring him to the clinic on Monday. But the next morning, on Saturday morning, when we woke up, Liam's legs and feet were extremely swollen, as I had indicated in my very first video. He was saturating diapers extremely rapidly. We would change them, we would wait only minutes, and they would be leaking again. That's how much he was urinating. He was very lethargic, very sleepy. Something clearly wasn't right. And in that moment, my wife and I trusted our instincts, and we took him to the emergency room. That's when his type 1 diabetes was diagnosed. So whether it's in your own body or it's in your child's body, pay attention to the symptoms. And if you see something that doesn't make sense, even if someone tells you it's probably nothing, you should always trust your instincts and get it checked out. And I'll say this as well. I'm part of a growing number of parents who believe that something as simple as a basic blood glucose fingerstick should be a normal part of a pediatrician visit when there are clear symptoms present that could point to a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. Had that been done for us that Friday, or even previously when we had taken him that week and the week before that, had a simple fingerstick been done by the pediatrician, they likely would have seen that very high blood sugar level right from the beginning and prevented the 2 weeks of agonizing that we had to endure before the diagnosis was given. And that's why trusting your own instincts and advocating when something doesn't feel right really matters. If you're a parent and your child is expressing some of the symptoms that I've explained in this video, and your child has not yet been diagnosed, and you're taking your child to the pediatrician and they're telling you, oh, he's fine, he's got the flu, or he just doesn't feel well right now, ask them point blank, can you please do a blood glucose check on my son? Can you please check his blood sugar levels? To at least rule out that it could be pre-type 1 or type 1 diabetes. Now I'd like to briefly touch on the difference between diabetic ketoacidosis and normal nutritional ketosis, because this can be confusing, and it has been confusing even to me for a while. Nutritional ketosis is a controlled metabolic state that some people intentionally enter as part of some diet. And it's often followed through something called a keto diet. In that situation, carbohydrate intake is kept extremely low, usually 5, 10, 15, up to 25 grams of carbs per day. That means the body doesn't have as much glucose available for energy. So instead, the body shifts to using those fat reserves as its primary fuel source. And that's intentional. When fat is broken down, ketones are produced, and those ketones are then used as an alternative energy source within the body. And that's the goal of a keto diet. People use it for things like weight loss or metabolic control because the body is essentially being guided to burn stored fat for energy instead of relying on carbohydrates. Now here's the important part to understand. In nutritional ketosis, there is still enough insulin present in the body to keep everything well balanced and well regulated. Ketone levels may rise slightly, but they stay within a controlled range, and the blood does not become acidic. The body is functioning normally, just using a different fuel source as intended by those who are following the keto diet. Diabetic ketoacidosis is completely different. In diabetic ketoacidosis, there is not enough insulin present, period. That lack of insulin removes the body's ability to regulate ketone production. So ketones rise rapidly and uncontrollably. At the same time, blood sugar levels are high, the blood begins to become acidic, and that's where the danger begins to become present. So while both situations do involve the word ketones, the context is completely different. One is a controlled, intentional metabolic state with insulin present and balance maintained. The other is an uncontrolled state caused by insulin deficiency, leading to raised ketones, high blood sugar, and acidosis. That's why nutritional ketosis is not inherently harmful, but diabetic ketoacidosis is a serious medical condition that requires immediate medical attention. If you understand what's happening, what causes it, and what to look for, and how to respond early, you are in a much better position to prevent it from becoming something serious. Now in our next video, we're going to shift into something very practical and hands-on. And you learn this in the hospital stay when you're first diagnosed. And that is how to perform a basic finger stick to check blood glucose levels. And I'll have a special guest joining me to walk through exactly how that's done step by step. Before wrapping up, and as a disclaimer, the content on the T1D Academy YouTube channel is for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as medical advice. I am neither a doctor nor a healthcare professional. Please always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for medical guidance specific to your situation. If you found this video helpful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to this channel. It helps support what Liam and I are building here with the T1D Academy, and it allows us to continue creating content that helps others better understand and manage type 1 diabetes. Until the next video, take care of yourselves and take care of each other, and remember, you've got this. And as always, to my beautiful son Liam, 143AI +1.